Welcome back to episode 12 of Take Charge of the Classroom, a web series designed to disrupt outdated behavior management models and help you create the classroom culture of your dreams. In this episode, we are looking at memory, and specifically the 3 phases of learning. So there's a lot more to this than I can explain on just one slide, but in short, there are 3 parts of memory that we need to be aware of as professional educators. The first part is the encoding. So this is when we get information in through our 5 senses, and we keep it in our short-term working memory, and we're doing something with it. So hopefully we're processing it. Hopefully we're putting some layers of meaning onto it, some memory tags, maybe connecting it to prior learning. But this is the first part of learning, is encoding. So when students are initially interacting with content. The second part is consolidation. So this is when memory comes from short-term and goes to long-term. It's an automatic process. It usually happens overnight while we're sleeping. And so our memory systems will filter through everything we learn through the day and take the most important things, hopefully the things that we taught as teachers, put them into long-term memory. That's consolidation. The third step is actually getting information out of long-term memory. That's called retrieval, back into your short-term working memory so you could do something with it. So how do we get kids to remember something we taught them last week or last month? That's that third phase, is that retrieval. Those are the 3 key phases of learning. And the reason we're talking about this is because the point of Take Charge of the Classroom is not just to get kids to act a little bit better. Sure, we want our kids to have better attitudes. We want their misbehavior to disappear. But at the end of the day, our job is not to necessarily manage student behavior. Our job is to help students learn. And it needs to show up on a test or some type of high-stakes achievement test. And so we need to engage our students. Last time we looked at engage, we were looking at motivation. So we were looking at what motivates students to learn. This time we are looking at memory. How do we best keep our kids engaged through using the natural memory processes? And specifically, what are some student actions that they can take to engage in this memory? So let's dispel a few myths about learning and first understand what it takes to actually have better learning. And this is something that we need to be very upfront with students and let them know from day one, this is what we'll be doing. First, it is deeper and it is more durable when it requires effort. This is why the positive culture is so important. This is why it's important to talk about a growth mindset and grit and perseverance. And this is why they need to trust you as the teacher and build strong relationships with you, because it's going to be hard. When it is light, easy hacks, tricks, fill-in-the-blank worksheets, it is not lasting. It is not durable. Quite honestly, it's not worth your time or theirs. So better learning is deeper and more durable when it requires effort. So when it becomes hard, that's when the learning is just about to begin. So we need to expect that. And the reason we have to make that clear is because some students think it's only working if it's easy, and that if it's hard, that means that they're not intelligent or they're doing something wrong. No, quite honestly, it's when they're doing something right is when it gets hard. But all learning requires a foundation of prior knowledge. Now, this is just pure neuroscience. Everything we learn has to be connected to prior knowledge. So when we are young, when we are infants, right, everything is through experience. We touch things, we smell things, we get things in through our 5 senses. That builds that prior knowledge. And then new information can be built on top of that. As we get older and as we have this really large wealth of experiential knowledge to pull from, we can learn new things and we can tie it to those previous things. And we don't necessarily have to experience something for the first time. So if we've been to a museum and then we read about a different museum, well, we can learn and remember about that different museum because we've at least had an experience with a museum, a type of museum, and we can infer what that new museum might be like. And so we have to be very experiential, and we have to tie everything into prior knowledge. So as a teacher, do everything you can to figure out what it is that your students have learned the previous years. What should they know just based on their experiences in the neighborhood, in the schools that they've taught in, what were they taught last year, what are some common things that these students are familiar with, whether it be video games, something that they know, because you can tie new learning to previous learning even if it's not a direct correlation, right? So you can use an analogy. You can use references in movies and in TV shows and YouTube channels. But it requires a foundation of prior knowledge. That's how we learn new things, is we link new things to what we already know. And any fast and easy strategy leads to a short-term learning because we can only apply it in the exact same situation with the exact same context. So let's just get rid of some of these fast and easy hacks, and let's do the down and dirty work of some of the deep, hard learning. So retrieval practice. Remember, there's those 3 phases of learning. There's the encoding, the consolidation, which usually happens overnight, and then retrieving it, your known knowledge, out of long-term memory into your short-term working memory so you could do something with it, like answer a question on a test. Well, what neuroscience has taught us is that rather than trying to cram information into students' brains, we actually need to work on getting it out. Because a lot of these students know these things because they have been taught it in the past. And when they look at you blankly, that doesn't mean that they weren't taught how to do certain things in math, that they weren't taught about nouns and verbs. They just haven't had practice getting that information out. So retrieval practice is a specific practice in which you try to get students to remember and pull things out of their long-term working memory back into their short-term working memory so that they can interact with it. They can use it for knowledge and they can apply it to a new situation. And so retrieval practice is really just a different way of thinking. As teachers, yes, we're teaching new things, but they actually know a lot of things. And so retrieval practice can be as simple as, in the middle of a lesson, you can stop and tell students, all right, so take 2 minutes and talk to your neighbor about 2 things you just learned, right? So they're trying to retrieve from the short-term working memory of something they just learned, and they're trying to retrieve it, and they're trying to interact with it. You can stop in the middle of a lesson or at the end of the lesson, say, why don't you write down 2 things you remember from last Friday's lesson about, and then whatever last Friday's was about. That's harder retrieval practice because in the middle of today's lesson, you're trying to get them to remember from last Friday. So that's definitely going to be a little bit harder. But when they do it, when they pull it out, it will be, once again, pulled into the short-term working memory. They can encode it again. They can process it again. It will be stored again in long-term memory that night, but it will have some additional memory tags because they've pulled it out and done something with it. And so the retrieval practice is literally just trying to remember whether it's a turn and talk, a stop and jot, about something that they just learned, something they learned yesterday, or something that they learned 3 weeks ago. And then as a part of that, they're going to need feedback. Because maybe they remember, maybe they don't. Maybe they remember partially and they need the whole picture, or maybe they remember incorrectly. But we get them to stop, practice pulling information out of their brains, trying to remember something, giving them some clues perhaps, and then giving them the actual answer to help clarify their retrieval to make sure that they actually remember the correct information that night as they get some new consolidation. There's another 2 things that we can do for retrieval practice to make it a little bit more durable. It's going to make it harder, but it's going to make it more durable. One is spacing. So spread out the retrieval practice. Don't immediately teach something and then get kids try to retrieve it. They haven't even had a chance to consolidate it and put it into long-term memory. So spread it out. So it's the next day, and then 3 days after that, and then a week after that. Spread it out. Keep it coming, but don't cram it all together into what scientists call massed practice. Spread it out so that it's spaced. And then mixing up is called interleaving. Mix up similar concepts. This is what makes it really, really difficult. Because if you've ever taught math and you've ever done a situation in which maybe students have 10 word problems, and all 10 word problems are using the exact same operation. Let's say they're all division. Well, after the kids have done 5 or 6 problems, they realize that all they have to do is divide the numbers. They stop reading and they start just skimming, looking for the numbers and dividing them. So that's massed practice, and that's similar practice. So interleaving would be mix them up. So it's addition, subtraction, multiplication, some division, right? And so they can't just skim, but they actually have to read, and they have to distinguish between different types of word problems. That's interleaving. That's mixing things up. A mixed review is harder than doing 18 problems the exact same way. It is harder, but remember, harder learning, more durable learning. That's what we're looking for here. So interleaving is mixing things up. So when you're reviewing cycles, don't just review the rock cycle. Review the water cycle with the life cycle of a butterfly with the rock cycle. They're all cycles, but they all have different stages and stage names, and so that's going to mix things up a little bit, and that's going to make it a little bit harder. But remember, harder equals durability. And then every time you bring this information back out of long-term memory, it comes into our short-term working memory. We interact with it, we process it. We're actually encoding it again. We're putting new memories on it. We're linking it to new learning. Because if you bring up something that you remember that you taught last month, well, you've learned a lot of things between now and last month. And so they will actually layer it with new pieces of information, and then they'll consolidate it again. You do this enough times, and this information becomes really easy to pull out. It's that automaticity that we get when we are reading, when we're recognizing letters and the names of each letter and the sound that each letter makes, or whether it's addition facts, multiplication facts. After a while, you keep pulling information out again and again and again. It becomes automatic. And that's what we call automaticity. That's what we need with any information. We just need to practice retrieving it again and again and again with spacing and with interleaving. It's more difficult, it is slower, it is going to feel harder, but as long as we have those good relationships with our students, as long as we're giving them feedback so that they, after the retrieval practice, they know how accurate their retrieval was, it is going to make a world of difference. And your students will feel successful, they will feel competent, they will be engaged. Everyone likes being successful. And guess what they won't have time for? Misbehavior, acting out, putting their heads down. Because when they're feeling successful and when they're feeling their brains growing, there's not much drive to act out or to misbehave or to seek attention. So rather than just trying to minimize student behavior, part of the Take Charge model is to try to maximize their learning, because when they're successful and engaged, they don't have time to misbehave. So thank you as always for watching this video. You can learn more about the entire Take Charge model and the book and any videos you missed on my website, aarondaffern.com/takecharge. You can email me or you can follow me on Twitter @AaronDaffern.